So this will be part 3 of A-Moor-Ica, and in this series I've been trying to show you guys as much evidence as possible that proves that the Moors were already in America prior to the arrival of white people, and before that I made 2 videos called Slaves from Africa or Moors Expelled from Europe. And in those videos I showed how the majority of the slaves of the so-called transatlantic slave trade weren't actually from Africa at all, but they were Moors expelled from Europe. So today in this video, I'll present to you evidence that proves without a doubt that the Moors were in America 1500 years ago, and America was indeed called A-Moor-Ica. So I'll start with a book called The History of England, and I'll see if I can find a link to the entire book. If I can, I'll leave it in the description box, because this is one of the most important documents that not only proves that America was originally called A-Moor-Ica, but it also proves that the stories that we've been told about white people discovering America 500 years ago are all a lie. Because the evidence that I present in this video will prove that white people were trying to invade America 1,000 years before they claimed to have discovered it. So I'll be reading to you parts of the book of the history of England that describe certain details about the life of King Arthur. And before I begin reading the book, I just want to clarify that there are no images of King Arthur that are known to exist today. But one thing that we do know for sure is that King Arthur was not a white man. So at the top, you'll see one of the only known descriptions of King Arthur, and it clearly says that he was black. It says, and I quote, "Even as I tell ye, his head, his body, and his hands were all black, saving only his teeth. His shield and his armor were even those of a Moor, and black as a raven." So we know that King Arthur was a Moor, and further proof of that is this picture of his grandson. So it's documented that Sir Morian, King Arthur's grandson, sat at the round table. It's also documented that he killed his own mother when his father's spirit spoke to him from the grave and said that his mother was responsible for his death. Nevertheless, Sir Morian was a Moor, and so was King Arthur. So now I'll begin with page 92 of the History of England. So I'll give some background of page 91, and page 91 and page 92 speak of King Arthur of England 1500 years ago, and he had issues with the invading Saxons who were trying to invade York, England. So King Arthur sends for his nephew Hoel and his army. So Hoel and his army come to York to assist his uncle King Arthur in defeating the Saxons. So we read on page 92 that King Arthur made a forced march, or rather flew to Hoel's assistance, raised a siege, afterwards ravaged their country to the utmost borders, and had not the bishops interceded, would have destroyed it entirely. Hoel, thus relieved, finding Arthur had no immediate want of his assistance, returned home. And we read, he returned to A-Moor-Ica. Meanwhile, King Arthur began restoring the churches and the schools that the Saxons had destroyed in his kingdom. Meanwhile, in another area of England, the King of Kent died, and the new king of the invading Saxons was named Cerdic. So we read that Cerdic, the new monarch, having received large reinforcements from Germany under 2 of his nephews, Cerdic and his nephews immediately took the field and ravaged the country of the Britons. So King Arthur did everything that he could to defend the native Britons or the Moors, but King Arthur had been weakened from the previous battles with the Saxons in York. So within a few years of battle, King Arthur's army was defeated. And this led to King Arthur making peace treaties with the Saxons by giving them large tracts of land, which are modern-day Hampshire and Somersetshire. So Cerdic and his army advanced further in the next coming years, and he founded the kingdom of Wessex, which means West Saxons, which lays west of Kent and Sussex. And Cerdic was crowned king 23 years after he had originally came into the land. So during this time of tranquility, King Arthur once again spends his time restoring the ruined churches and buildings within his kingdom, or at least what's left of his domain. So in the year 527, the Saxons took Essex, containing the country of Middlesex, and the capital is London. At the same time, an infinite number of Angles arrived. Now keep in mind that the current Queen of England descends from the invading Angles, and she identifies as Anglican. So in the year 527, the invading Angles arrived and forced the native Britons, or the Moors, to abandon London. After some time had passed, there was a brief time of peace. The Saxons were momentarily content with the territory that they had taken from King Arthur. So because of this, there was a brief time of peace. So we read, Hoel, king of A-Moor-Ica, during the continuance of peace in Britain, sent for his uncle Arthur for assistance against a rebellion in A-Moor-Ica, a man named Frillin. Now Frillin was King Arthur's enemy. Frillin was a Visigoth from Germany, and the Visigoths were the same white people from Germany who had previously invaded Rome. And we see here that in the year 527, or 1500 years ago, the Visigoth Frillin was trying to invade A-Moor-Ica and usurp the kingdom of A-Moor-Ica from Hoel, King Arthur's nephew. And we read that King Arthur went to A-Moor-Ica in person and slew Frillin with his own hand, putting an end to the rebellion in A-Moor-Ica. But while King Arthur was in A-Moor-Ica helping his nephew, his absence contributed not only to the establishment of the Angles, but Cerdic, king of the Saxons, took advantage of Arthur's absence, and he broke the treaties that he made with Arthur. So when Arthur returned home from A-Moor-Ica, his kingdom was in disarray once again, and he was forced to make new peace treaties with Cerdic. But later that year, the Visigoths once again invaded A-Moor-Ica in the year 528, for the second time that year. So King Arthur once again left and came to the assistance of his nephew, King Hoel, in A-Moor-Ica. But this time, before King Arthur went to A-Moor-Ica, he left a regent in the care of his kingdom. So King Arthur left what was left of his kingdom, known as the Isles of Wight, in the care of his nephew Modred. He also left his queen in the care of his nephew Modred, while he once again goes to A-Moor-Ica to fight with his nephew Hoel. But once again, Cerdic, the Saxon king, was happy to have a fresh opportunity to invade more of King Arthur's territory while he was away fighting in A-Moor-Ica. This time, Cerdic invaded the Isles of Wight and barbarically massacred the inhabitants. But the worst was yet to come for King Arthur. While Cerdic was invading the Isles of Wight, his nephew, Modred, that he left in charge of the Isles of Wight, had raped King Arthur's wife and then publicly married her and usurped the throne of King Arthur. So King Arthur was not only betrayed by Cerdic once again while he was away, but this time he was also betrayed by his own nephew, Modred. So Modred was fearful of his uncle King Arthur's return, so he made an alliance with Cerdic. Modred gave Cerdic part of the Isles of Wight in exchange for his military alliance. And Modred unjustly gave Cerdic Cornwall, Berkshire, Wiltshire, Devonshire, and Dorsetshire. And it says that the native people, or the rightful sovereigns, were filled with grief and resentment, but none of them dared to publicly oppose what had just happened. And with King Arthur in A-Moor-Ica, the people were helpless. So on page 94, we read that Cerdic begins bringing over great numbers of Saxons and Jutes. And keep in mind, when we hear terms like Saxons and Angles or Jutes and Visigoths, they're also known as the Anglo-Saxons. They're all the same invading white races who came out of Germany. So Cerdic begins to fill the land with more white people. And Cerdic also begins building forts and fortifying the Isles of Wight because he's dreading the return of King Arthur. And on page 95 we read, Cerdic strengthened his forces to be able to make head against him when he should come back from A-Moor-Ica. but he never lived to see the day King Arthur returned because he died in the middle of his preparations for war in the year 534, 16 years after his coronation and 39 years after his arrival on the island. So Serdik's son, Senric, succeeded the throne of his father, and Senric, along with the Saxons and the Angles, continued to rule the territories that Serdic took from King Arthur. So just to put things into perspective, the invasions of Serdic and his mass murdering of the native Britons, or the Moors, lasted for 39 years. And we know that these battles began in the early 500s. This is when the Moors and the Saxons documented the arrival of the invading Saxons. But we can fast forward to 1,000 years after the time of King Arthur and Cerdic, and we can see that even 1,000 years after all of that took place, the Moors were still fighting the invading white races, and they were called wildmen. So the Moors weren't just fighting some invading albino army from Germany. They were fighting cave beasts, or wildmen. And this explains why every time they would advance and gain more territory, the native Britons would flee. They would scatter in all directions, and understandably, because they were battling barbaric savages. Nevertheless, we know that these battles between the invading white races and the Moors started in the early 500s, and we know that these battles were still going on 1,000 years later. So I'm going to skip a few pages and end this video with page 99 and 100. I'll get back to the pages that I skipped and continue the story of King Arthur in the next part of this series. Because I have so much more to show you guys about ancient A-Moor-Ica, I'll have to break this down in several parts. So by the time of the 1500s, the Moors were still defending their castles in Europe from the invading white races. However, by the time of the 1500s, there weren't many Moors still left in Britain because the majority of them had already left 1,000 years before that. So now I'll end this video by showing you what happened to the majority of the Britons, or the Moors, who fled Britain in the year 584. We read on page 99 that with the new invader, the Britons abandoned their habitations in multitudes. The measure of their griefs were full. They had no relief to expect, and therefore followed a single resolution they had to put in practice, which was to flee to Wales. When they fled, the Saxons took possession of their territory, the territory being Humber, Thames, and Severn. So now the Britons were surrounded on all sides by the newly founded kingdoms of the Saxons, and the multitudes of Britons were pushed into Wales. And we read, Wales being too narrow to support them all, the multitudes of Britons fled to A-Moor-Ica, in which country many of their brethren had long been settled. So I'll repeat that. In the year 584, multitudes of native Britons, or Moors, came to A-Moor-Ica, the country where their brethren had long been settled.